Welcome to the Iran 1400 Project podcast, where we explore the past, present, and possible futures of Iran through informed dialogue, independent thought, and diverse voices. From historical insight to emerging narratives, we connect ideas to action in the pursuit of a more just, inclusive, and forward-looking society. Join us as we rethink Iran's trajectory, one conversation at a time.
It's amazing how one word, mother, can mean so many different things, isn't it?
Absolutely. Nurturer, guide, protector.
Right. The list goes on. Today, we're zoning in on one specific place, Iran. We're going to do a deep dive into how the idea and the reality of motherhood there have changed over, well, the last 100 years or so.
Yeah, it's a fascinating journey. And we've got some really rich sources to draw on: poetry, political analysis, legal documents.
Cultural shifts, societal changes, the whole picture.
Exactly. We're trying to piece it all together.
So think of this as your shortcut to understanding this really dynamic story. We'll break it down into about 6 key periods, and hopefully we'll uncover some surprising things about this, well, absolute central role in Iranian society. Okay, ready to jump in?
Let's do it.
All right, let's start back in the late Qajar and early Pahlavi times. So maybe 1920s through the 1940s. What's the picture we get from back then?
Well, back then, the dominant image, especially if you look at the poetry of the time, it's the mother as this almost sacred figure.
Sacred. How so?
As the main nurturer, the moral compass for the whole family, you see it really clearly in poets like Parvin Etisami. Her work often shows mothers as these paragons of virtue, modesty, patience, wisdom, that sort of thing. It's a very elevated image.
Okay, so deeply respected in art, almost idealized. But what did that actually mean for women's day-to-day lives?
Well, that's the contrast, isn't it? In reality, this ideal meant their lives were mainly focused on the home, caregiving, domestic duties, pretty much confined to the private sphere.
And education?
Very limited for women generally, and so for mothers too. And then there's the political context. This was a time of rising nationalism. So mothers were seen as crucial for raising the next generation of good citizens, instilling those moral values, but primarily within the home.
Interesting. So the nation's morality starts with the mother, but quietly, behind closed doors. What about their legal status, though? That usually tells a different story.
It definitely does. Legally, mothers had very few rights of their own. The civil codes were based on Sharia law. Which often meant things like, losing custody of children in a divorce, having limited or no inheritance rights, and just lacking general legal autonomy.
Wow. So a huge gap between that poetic ideal and the legal social reality.
A really significant disconnect, yeah. They might have been put on an emotional pedestal, but they lacked real power to control their own lives or even their children's lives in many cases.
Okay, so that sets the scene. Now let's move forward a bit. The Pahlavi modernization era, say the 1940s up to 79. How did things start to change then?
Well, this is where the modernization efforts, first by Reza Shah and then his son, Mohammad Reza Shah, really start to impact perceptions of women.
How so?
Women, including mothers, increasingly became symbols of Iran's push towards progress. There was a definite emphasis on expanding education for women and encouraging more participation in civic life, especially in the cities.
So the image starts to broaden out from just the home to something more public.
Exactly. And you see this reflected in the arts, too. Poetry starts showing women with more complexity, intellectual interests, emotional depth, not just defined by being a mother.
And politically. How did the state view mothers now?
The regime actively promoted this idea of the educated mother. She was seen as an agent of nation building, helping Iran modernize. They even pushed state-approved models of modern motherhood.
But surely there was some pushback. Modernization often creates tension, right?
Oh, absolutely. There was a real cultural tension. This push for modernization, which many saw as westernization, bumping up against traditional values and norms, it wasn't a smooth transition.
And the law, did that catch up?
This is where we see some really significant changes. The family protection laws of 1967 and later 1975 were landmark pieces of legislation.
What did they do?
They gave women, including mothers, much greater rights. Things like divorce, child custody, the right to actually consent to their own marriage. It was a period of definite legal empowerment.
That sounds like real progress on the legal front. Yeah. But then everything changes again with the Islamic Revolution in 79 and the Iran-Iraq War that followed. A totally different era, 1979 to 88.
A profound shift, yes. After the revolution, motherhood was completely redefined through an explicitly religious framework. Meaning the mother was now positioned as the moral bedrock of the new Islamic society. Her key role, raising pious children, raising potential martyrs even, and guardians of the revolution's ideology.
And I bet the culture machine kicked into high gear promoting that image.
Absolutely. State-sponsored art, poetry, propaganda, it all heavily celebrated the Madare-e-Shahid, the mother of a martyr.
Right.
She was elevated to this almost divine status, the ultimate symbol of sacrifice and devotion to the cause. That became a really dominant cultural image.
So we go from educated matrons symbolizing progress to sacred martyr mothers symbolizing religious devotion and sacrifice. What did this mean for women more broadly, socially and legally?
Socially, there was a big pushback towards more traditional roles. Mandatory hijab, restrictions on women's movement and participation in public life. And legally, well, that progress we just talked about, reversed. The family protection law was repealed. Gone. Replaced by Sharia-based laws that strongly favored male guardianship. So mothers' legal standing, especially regarding custody and family autonomy, was drastically reduced.
Wow, a major rollback. Okay, let's move into the next period. After the war, the Reconstruction and Reformist era, roughly 1989 to 2009, what image starts to come through then?
After the intensity of the war years, you start to see a new image emerging, the mother as a survivor. Resilient.
How does that show up?
Well, poetry, and especially cinema, began exploring the emotional toll, the trauma of war, but also economic hardship, the social changes. Think of filmmakers like Asghar Farhadi.
Yes, his films often feature very complex women.
Exactly. Complex maternal figures dealing with really tough moral choices, societal pressures. It's a more nuanced, less overtly ideological portrayal than in the war era.
So a shift towards realism, maybe, acknowledging the struggle.
Precisely. And the social reality was that because of the war and its aftermath, many women had to be resilient. Many became heads of households, the main breadwinners or educators, out of sheer necessity.
And politically?
Yeah.
Were there attempts to improve things for women during the reformist period?
There were. Reformist governments did try to bring in some moderate improvements to women's rights, but progress was usually slow, often facing strong opposition.
And legally? Any gains there?
Some small incremental gains. Things like slightly better access to family courts, maybe some nuances in custody rights were debated, but the fundamental patriarchal legal structure, that largely remained in place.
So, a time of quiet resilience, maybe some slow, uneven progress, but still within a very restrictive framework. Okay, what about the next phase? Post-Green Movement, 2009 up to around 2021, and also thinking about the diaspora.
This is where mothers take on a really powerful new role. They become witnesses, activists even.
How did that happen?
Well, after the disputed 2009 election and the Green Movement protests and the state crackdown, mothers whose children were killed or disappeared became incredibly powerful symbols.
Symbols of grief, but also resistance.
Exactly. Think of groups like the Mothers of Kavaran or the Mothers of Layla Park. They started publicly demanding justice, demanding answers. Their courage was extraordinary and gained a lot of attention, both inside Iran and internationally.
Such a powerful, painful form of activism. How did this get reflected in art and culture?
You see themes of loss, displacement, but also that incredible maternal strength coming through very strongly in poetry and art, especially works created in exile in the diaspora.
And speaking of the diaspora, what was the experience for mothers living outside Iran?
Well, often it involved this complex balancing act, trying to maintain Iranian traditions and culture for their children while navigating life in a totally different global context. They often became key cultural anchors.
And any legal shifts in this period?
One really significant one, actually. In 2020, a law was finally passed allowing Iranian women to pass their citizenship onto their children born to non-Iranian fathers.
It was a long fight, wasn't it?
A very long fight, yes. A major victory for many families, especially those with mixed nationality parents.
Okay, which brings us pretty much up to the present. The woman, life, freedom era kicking off in 2022 after the death of Mahsa Amini. What role are mothers playing now?
Tragically, but perhaps predictably, given the history we've discussed, mothers are again central, and they've become incredibly powerful voices of resistance.
In what way?
The mothers of young people killed in the recent protests, like the mothers of Nika Shakarami, Hadis Najafi, and so many others, they have refused to be silenced.
Despite the risks.
Despite immense pressure, threats, harassment, their grief, their testimony, it carries enormous moral weight. They're directly challenging the state's narrative, its legitimacy even, and digital platforms have amplified their voices globally.
It's incredibly moving and brave. How is this current moment being captured artistically?
You see contemporary poetry and art portraying mothers very explicitly as agents of dissent, figures of mourning, yes, but also incredible courage, vocal, demanding change.
So culturally, it feels like a real shift. Mothers aren't just background figures anymore.
Not at all. They are active participants, often right at the forefront of this national upheaval. Their experiences, their voices are absolutely central to the woman life freedom movement.
What about legally? For these grieving mothers speaking out, what protection or recourse do they actually have?
And that's the harsh reality. Legally, very little has changed for them. Mothers of slain protesters face surveillance, intimidation.
No justice.
Generally, no meaningful access to justice or accountability for their children's deaths. Family law is still biased. The legal system offers them almost no protection against the state when they speak out like this.
So their moral authority is immense, incredibly visible, but the legal framework hasn't caught up. It still doesn't protect them.
Exactly. It's a stark contrast, and it really highlights the main takeaway from this whole deep dive, I think. That the role of the Iranian mother has just been constantly reshaped and redefined over this past century. She's been a national symbol, a political pawn, a subject of laws, often all at the same time, and often in tension.
Yeah, from that idealized moral guide in old poems to the grieving revolutionary on social media today, the journey is just incredible.
It really is. And we've seen how poetry, politics, culture, law, they all interact, sometimes pushing in different directions, to shape this evolving figure.
So as we wrap up, maybe the thought to leave listeners with is this. Considering this incredible resilience, this evolving, strengthening voice of Iranian mothers, what does their ongoing struggle really tell us? Not just about Iran's future, but maybe about motherhood itself, especially when society is in such flux.
That's a powerful question. Definitely something to think about.
Thank you for listening to the Iran 1400 Project podcast. The Iran 1400 Project invites scholars, experts, and intellectuals to share their assessment of the evolution of institutions and ideas during the past 100 years to inspire a vision of Iran in the 1400s. If you found today's episode thought-provoking, be sure to subscribe, share, and continue the conversation. For more content and upcoming events, visit Iran1400.org. Until next time, stay engaged, stay informed, and stay hopeful.